Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unmute Yourself with Rhonda Khan. It's been a minute. I'm so happy to see all of you. If you are here, let me know where you are reaching out from in the chat. I am so thrilled to be here. I have a very, very special guest. But before I introduce this guest, this beautiful woman you see with these amazing spectacles next to me, we are going to talk about speaker archetypes. If you have been following me for a while, you know what I've been talking about, screaming about from the rooftops are my new speaker archetypes. I believe that everybody has their own unique speaking style. Everybody does. And so what we did was we crafted these speaker archetypes. There are 5 that I feel like everybody seems to fall into. And what we do believe is that once you know your speaker archetype, feel really strong in your speaker archetype, you can leverage it to your advantage. All right. So today is special because I have a colleague and new friend, Ivonne Furneaux, here from Empower Up Consulting. Everybody, welcome Ivonne.
Hello, everyone.
Now, if you have already read, you know a little bit about Ivonne, but let me break it down. She is a keynote speaker, former corporate executive, and founder of Empower Up Consulting. She helps organizations and the people in them unleash their full potential by exposing and closing the hidden gaps in connection. That's important. We're going to go back to that. In connection and access that fuel disengagement and turnover in every workplace. She has more than 20 years, y'all, of experience leading communications, DEI, and employee experience at companies like United Health Group, Target, Weight Watchers, as well as an advanced degree in human resources. Ivonne brings insight, academic knowledge, and lived experience to her audience. Everybody, please welcome Ivonne Furneaux once again.
Thank you. Can I give myself applause? You made me sound so important. Thanks for the intro.
You are. So as we are connected here on LinkedIn, I know you have a great platform you're building. What's something that your LinkedIn Live audience may not know about you?
Yeah, so some fun facts about me. I am a military brat. So I grew up a lot of different places. I was born in New York. I lived in Arizona. I did most of junior high and high school in Alaska. Went to college in Minnesota, lived in Italy for a while. Now I live outside of Chicago. But I share that because it's really shaped who I am. I feel like I'm very independent and adaptable thanks to that upbringing. And I've always been surrounded by like a diverse mix of people everywhere I've lived and gone. And so I feel like it's just really shaped who I am in a lot of ways. And I just like the experience of having been a military brat, and I think it's a really important one to share. But it also means that I always can never answer the question, where are you from?
Yes.
We're on here now, and you want to ask me where I'm from, don't ask. I'm from wherever I live right now.
Yes, well, you're from everywhere.
I'm from everywhere and nowhere. Yeah.
You're from everywhere. But I totally see how that while it may be difficult to answer the question, I imagine it makes you really adaptable to different situations because you've been in multiple groups and spaces and geographic environments, languages, all of that, dialects. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, if I survived at 12 years old, moving from Phoenix, Arizona to Anchorage, Alaska in the middle of 7th grade. So I think I can survive anything after that.
What a time. Ooh, 7th grade.
Yeah.
Ooh, Phoenix to Alaska. Ooh, okay.
I mean, you hate everything when you're 12, when you're a 12-year-old girl anyway, right?
Yep. You got it. So, Ivonne, you have been on both sides of leadership. So within organizations as an executive, and I'm sure you've guided different organizations as a speaker and consultant. Yeah. So what made you realize that this next chapter as a keynote speaker and consultant was the best next step for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So take you back a little bit. I started my career in communications at Target many years ago. And so not only have I lived kind of on both sides of leadership, but I've lived on the side of not being a leader, right? And I think that's really important because you start off in corporate America, especially, you're starting at a lower level position and you're working your way up. And so through the years, I kind of experienced all the different realms of having starting from the bottom of the organization to moving toward the top of an organization, and how your experience changes throughout each of those steps in the workplace. And along the way, as you mentioned, I led communications, I led DEI. So my job, a lot of times on a tactical level, was doing things like writing speeches for CEOs or developing a communication plan when there was going to be a big merger, or training people on diversity and inclusion initiatives. So there was always this aspect of like either helping others find their voice, creating messaging, influencing, and also in many ways, I was the mouthpiece for a lot of organizations. Especially when I was a chief diversity officer, I was on a lot of stages representing my company, representing the industry. And so the reality is I got laid off last year. And that's a story of so many people right now. And for me, it was an opportunity to think on whether or not I wanted to go back into that type of role, or whether or not it was time for me to have my own voice. And I felt like I had so much experience that I had cultivated and so much knowledge I had gained that I wanted to really cultivate my own voice versus being the voice of a brand or someone else, or helping others to find their voice, because I do feel like I have an important message to share. So that was really like my catalyst for like, I want to share my voice. I have an important message to share. And beyond that, I think that my knowledge can really help other people have a better experience in the workplace. And it can help organizations create workplaces that are better for their people. So that was kind of my catalyst for me to where I am now. And I love being able also now to go into organizations with a different lens, because you probably know, Rhonda, when you go in as a third party versus being within the organization, it frees you to speak a little more truthfully and authentically than you would be if you were an employee at the organization. That's just the sad reality. So I love being able to kind of speak truth to power in a new way in this role from this position now.
Oh, so many good things. What an incredible journey you've had. And I love it.
It's been a journey, yes.
It's been a journey, but we have a lot of alignment on, helping people find their voice and crafting messaging, and realizing that, I have all this experience and I can inject it into these organizations in a different way, whether it's delivering a keynote and solving these bigger business problems, to consulting and solving particular challenges. And absolutely, you saw me do a deep sigh, being a third, I must say, I do enjoy being that other person. And I think there's also, and this is really going to be helpful for when we start to talk about your archetype next. It's also helpful because I feel like when you're not internal, you can see a lot of things. You can see a lot of things really, really clearly. And I feel like sometimes leaders are like responsible for what they're responsible for, and they're trying to, get their initiatives forward and meet their goals. And you can spend just a little bit of time with people and be like, aha, like I see everything, because that's definitely what I see when I show up. Is that the same?
Yes, for sure. And I will say, I felt a lot of that when I was internal to organizations, right? I was often in positions where I had kind of a broad view of the business or of the organization, especially in communications, where you really have to understand the business. You have to kind of have a lens across all the business units. So oftentimes I would have that lens, and I would have those opinions about what we could or should do. But it's just that much harder to influence sometimes when you're inside the organization. And I remember in the past, like my company is going to bring in some big, third party consultant and spend all kinds of money. And I'm like, they come in and they say the exact same thing that I already told them. Like, I already told you guys this is what we should do, right? But that's great. Let's go pay a bunch of money for somebody else to tell you what to do. So,
but now
I get to be that person coming in and telling them what to do.
Right. Like now pay us.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's real. That's real. And to any leader listening, we are here to affirm we know what you know. And so when we come in as consultants, we are here to affirm and help bring forward the things that need to happen. So we are on each other's side. We are partnering with you in that way. But this is a really, really great point. I want to bring up your archetype. And so if you haven't, let me post this in the chat right now. If you have not taken, if my button can press enter, if you have not taken our, I think I have to post it on LinkedIn separately too. If you have not taken our archetype quiz, please do so, because you will find out what archetype you are. You'll get an explanation of your archetype once you take the quiz. The quiz is like less than 5 minutes, and then you'll get a video of me breaking it all down to you. And Ivonne took our quiz, and she is a reflector. Okay, so there are 5 archetypes for anybody who doesn't know. There is spark, there is connector, there is engineer, there is current, and there is reflector. So reflectors are often, in my opinion, the wisest people in the room. Would you agree, Yvonne?
Yes, in my opinion too.
And so you all really sit and process in a very, very deep way. You think, you integrate all the elements. You often are really good with words naturally, and sometimes even in a poetic way. Like sometimes when you speak, it sounds like really prepared and poetic, even though that necessarily may not be the way you intended. It's just the way you are, because you are comfortable with words. But it doesn't come out right away. It takes a while for you to integrate those thoughts. It takes a while for you to really think through, and you want to have the deepest understanding of that. And sometimes when that happens, people are, the other archetypes, which, you have your sparks, who have those big ideas that talk fast, that good energy, and the currents that are flowing, or the engineer that's thinking about the data and the specifics, or the connector who's really trying to empathize. Sometimes what I notice is the reflector, you may miss the brilliance of the reflector if you have moved past. But when we do hear the reflector speak, we're all like, yeah, like there's often like a yeah or a sigh or a quiet, because you probably have that thing that's solving the problem, that thing that we need. And so, one thing I do, I say these are not completely prescriptive, and sometimes they're hybrid. But one thing I did ask Yvonne before we started, I was like, now, I told her about all the other archetypes. I let her read about them. I'm like, do you still identify as a reflector? And she said, yes, wholeheartedly a reflector. And so with that, you were just mentioning the situation you were just mentioning about how you would be in these companies and they would bring in that consultant.
Yeah.
And you would be like, but I said that yesterday. I said that last week. But I've been screaming that. I've written emails, I've done talks, I've led meetings on that. But you got this person. I want to know, what are some of the common communication situations that you found yourself in, and how do you feel like your archetype showed up in those situations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, because of my roles, my my communication had to happen on a lot of different levels, right? So there was a lot of the interpersonal communication where I'm having to kind of influence a C-suite leader. There's a lot of like leading big meetings. Now I'm going to lead this 200-person leadership summit. And so that's a different type of communication. And then there's the communication that happens when you're leading a team. So I did feel like when I think back on my corporate career, there was a lot of adaptability in my communication style that had to happen. But I think the thread of being a reflector kind of thread through all of those scenarios, right? Okay. And being very thoughtful and mindful about how I wanted to approach something. And I will say that I also think that my style evolved over time through my corporate career. I mean, over 20 years, your style might change, right? So I think earlier on, I was a little bit more like bull in a china shop. Like, I'm just going to be super honest and I'm just going to tell you what I think all the time. And I realized quickly that that didn't serve me well in the environments I was in. I also didn't have like corporate role models in my life. I was like the first person in my family to, get a degree and work in the corporate world and all that. So for me, it was a very new environment to be in when I entered the corporate space.
Yeah.
So I entered it like not really even knowing how to be, how to act, how to communicate. And over time, as I elevated in my career, I found myself becoming more and more of a reflector in that I was just much more mindful about how I communicated with whom and when. And sometimes that could lead to like an overthinking in situations and keeping quiet maybe when I shouldn't have kept quiet. So there are just a lot of different scenarios that I can think of where there was an opportunity to say something, but I just didn't say it because I just felt like it wasn't the right time, or I didn't want to put myself in the line of fire, or whatever it may be. So that's what I see kind of as the drawback that happened as I really fell into that reflector style.
Okay.
But overall, I think, especially when I started getting the opportunity to kind of lead bigger things or be on stages, that it was this chance to like be very intentional about what the message was. And I love, to your point earlier, helping people think about something in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly when you're doing diversity work, which now is like it's kind of even a bad word to say, but there's always been that element of having to kind of like convince people in a different way, or use data, or speak to them where they are. And so all of that really played well into my reflector style, and in that intentionality in the words that I spoke at any given moment to any particular audience.
Yeah. Yeah. This is really so many things I want to pull out from this. You definitely identify as a reflector, and really thinking about like what our communication role models or leadership role models are, because I think that's what we learn first. We copy
Yeah.
what we know, and you didn't have that. Like you said, you were the first person in your family to have like a corporate role,
Yeah.
and and so it was you did what you felt perhaps you should do, or maybe was natural to you. I'm not quite sure. And that'll be something to just really explore of like, did you think that you needed to be bold, or were you naturally bold? Or did you feel like, and sometimes like maturity can play a role too,
Yeah.
and just kind of like reading the room. But I think over time, what sounds like is like you really cultivated your style, which was, let me observe, let me really think about it, let me be mindful. And I don't know that it was necessarily mindful in terms of like, how do I show up? But like, let me really understand the best approach to this
Yeah.
after getting all the information, after really being thoughtful about it. Would you
Yeah.
say that's
Yeah,
accurate?
for sure. And I just think I've always had this kind of like deep desire for a greater understanding of things. So my undergrad degree was in journalism. So it was
Oh,
always in me to like ask a lot of questions and really try to understand things in a broader way. I thought I was going to go be a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist someday, or write for Sports
yeah.
Illustrated. I don't know. I was confused, but anyway. But the point is that was always kind of in me, that like I really wanted to ask a lot of questions and really seek to understand, and help people understand what the truth was.
Yeah.
So that boldness was already in me early
Mm.
on. And so it was like a matter of how do I channel it appropriately. And I think, to your point, maturity played a role in that. But yeah, I think this this innate sense was always there. And I think you might agree that whatever style you are, there's always going to be some innate nature to
Yeah.
it in how you have shown up in every space, even if that changes a little bit over time.
Totally. 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 Yes. I have more that I want to say and ask about. I want to make sure that the folks on LinkedIn get the quiz, because I really want to know. When I posted about reflectors, I posted about all the archetypes recently, but when I posted about reflectors, people they resonated with that post a
Yeah.
lot. And I feel like there are a lot of reflectors out there who are working in leadership, who are having these big spaces. And I feel like the assumption is that you got to be a spark,
Mm-hmm.
an engineer, or like, those other archetypes that are like what people would stereotype as bigger personalities
Yes.
or room commanders. And it doesn't, there are different ways. I wanted to public service announcement. There are different ways to command a room. And if we know what our innate sense is, like if we're operating opposite of that, it doesn't always work well for us.
Correct.
You had a story that you wanted to share that I
Yeah.
think would be a very wow moment. Can you share the story of how when your reflector showed up in a certain situation?
Yeah. So many, many, many years ago, you might remember a little television show called The Apprentice. And now The Apprentice has led to all kinds of things that we're currently living in. But back then, it was a huge reality show. I've always been kind of addicted to reality TV. And I auditioned for season 2 of The Apprentice. And don't do the math because you'll figure out how old I am then. Um, it was an open casting call in Minneapolis. I was working for Target at the time. I took the morning off to go stand in line for hours. And the way the audition process worked, and again, none of us had any idea what to expect when we got in the room. They brought about 10 or 12 people into a room, into a conference room, and sat us around a table. And the producer told us that he just wanted us to have a conversation. And there were cameras rolling and producers in the room. And the producer said something about affirmative action. What are your opinions on affirmative action? Now, being a reflector, I sat there and I wanted to think for a moment. And the room was silent for about a millisecond until someone loud in the room decided to speak up and speak out against affirmative action and why. Somebody else jumped in and said why it's a good thing. And suddenly there was this kind of shouting match in the room to see who could have the loudest voice. I didn't say a word because I was still thinking about how I wanted to respond, but I suddenly felt out of my depth and that there was no way that I could even participate in this type of environment or show because it's just not who I am to be loud and combative like that. So that was like, I didn't even think about it in the terms of reflector until I took this quiz and it kind of sparked for me. And I was thinking about when are times that my reflector really like came to be. And that was just for me, like a perfect example of like, not as necessarily a downfall of a reflector, just the way I showed up in that moment because of my tendency to want to like really process and think and say the right thing before just spouting nonsense.
Yeah, I have a couple things to say about that. And I think this is a great kind of, we can use this example for some coaching conversations. And so what you said, you tried out for some show, who knows that show? Just some show that, we all watched. And during the audition, the question was asked about affirmative action, and there were people on opposing sides, but they had very big personalities, very passionate, and it just became a shouting match. And you didn't get to share because it was just like, there's no way I'm going to get in here. And I'm still trying to be thoughtful because I want to make sure that you're extremely intentional. And anybody following me knows how I feel about that word. You're extremely intentional about how you want to share and thoughtful and choosing your words. And the other people are blurting and shouting. So there is an element, I'm going to call this out, about like reality TV and people knowing that they're going to be selected by acting a fool. So there's that.
Exactly.
So I'm sure that was probably in some of those spaces, but the people who choose to act a fool are probably innately different archetypes than yours, right? Because you wouldn't do that. And so while this is kind of a heightened situation of an audition, I'm sure in the professional corporate world, this happens all the time where you have these different opposing views by people of like similar personality types kind of duking it out. And maybe there's a yes and or something here or there, but you have a reflector in the room that probably has the best solution or probably has a perspective that neither person has thought about, but you don't get a chance to say.
Right.
Or you feel like I can't even get in. Like the analogy I'm thinking about is double dutch, which is funny because I don't jump well. Don't take my cards. I still feel shame. But when you're trying to just jump in and like I can't get in. And you're kind of
can't get a word in edgewise. Yeah.
What'd you say?
Can't get a word in edgewise.
And so what I do think, I always say that teams should really be conscious of that people have different leadership and communication styles, and that sometimes you need to give space to others to be able to do that and trust them. And I think for the reflectors, I think that the key is like not to change how you communicate, but I think adding that layer of like why it is personal to you, if it is personal, or how you're particularly invested in it, that kind of helps us lean in a little bit more, because reflectors are so much about the picture and the pieces and instead of like the individual connection to it. And I think that's often a way that reflectors can really be like, wow, like this is really important to Ivonne, and Ivonne has a stake in this that probably, or not even a stake, but just like a perspective that other people won't have. And so we need to shut our, and listen, I'm part of those other people. So but we need to sometimes be quiet and just really listen and hear it and take some time to process. And so in a way, reflectors help us slow down and just really sink in. But the way reflectors can be like, hey, We want to know that. We want to know that it means something. We want to know that you just haven't thought through, but like we want to feel that. How does that resonate?
Yeah, no, I think that's totally true. And I think reflectors make the best inclusive leaders, if I'm just being biased, because I know when I was a leader, there are always going to be people in the room who have a big voice and some people who are going to be less likely to speak up. So I was always very intentional about wanting to hear everybody's perspectives. Like, such and such hasn't had a chance to share what she thinks, so let's hear what she has to say, you know. And that is really one of the tenets of inclusive leadership, is making sure that voices get heard. And it's so easy for us reflectors to not be heard if we are too deep in our heads and overthinking things or too afraid to speak up. So yes, absolutely. I think it's really important that we are kind of lifting each other's voices when we can. And I also read this article that you sparked me to think of that has been living rent free in my head for a long time. It's why do we keep promoting incompetent men in corporate leadership? And the title is very controversial. Yes, okay, so we won't go there with
no.
Look, but the point of the article is about how we tend to reward and promote particular personality traits, and that is often the loudest person in the room, right? And those traits are often associated with masculinity. And then there are certain traits that make great inclusive leadership traits, like empathy and compassion and listening skills, that actually create better teams and better results. But we are so conditioned to promoting and valuing those masculine traits and devaluing what are considered feminine traits, whether or not that's the case, but that's how we associate them. And so I think that a lot of what you're talking about in the reflector archetype and your other archetypes kind of plays into that science as well, as far as like what are our biases that we have, that the traits that we value in how people communicate, and how do we make sure that different styles are valued just as equally. And that's something that I had to really come to terms with entering professional speaking, because I am not like the hoorah, jumping on stage, jumping up and down and throwing out. That is not me. That will never be me. But for a hot minute, I thought that that's what I needed to be. And I had to come to accept, like, it doesn't make my style any less meaningful or powerful to not be that. So your work helps me realize that too. So thank you.
I'm so glad to hear that. I'm so glad. So many things. Thank you for sharing the information about that article. I would love to see that article. If later you
see our article, I'll find it. Yeah.
Yeah. If you could even drop that in the chat for anybody that listens to the replay, because I think talking about that, it speaks to a lot of why I developed the archetypes. It's always been my framework and model to find your own style in all our parts we bring to the table. But 100%, I think a lot of people come into leadership copying what they think it should be. And often that's come from like a male kind of old school, white collar, we can go into the details of like whatever you think the boss should be like. And then I often see people, we can talk about like identity and just culture. Like we can really get into it. That's a whole other LinkedIn Live. And I do talk
Yes, it is. And we could do
and I do get into that very much into my programs, but it's just like, who told you to be like that?
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? Because we can tell that it's not you when you're trying to be that way. And sometimes and it doesn't work out for you. And I think that's trying to imitate any kind of style. Like it doesn't work out to you. There are ways to be effective regardless of your style, if you know your style, if you know what works for you. And that's kind of where the archetypes come from. So there's that. And then especially with keynoting, because I want to ask you about that as well. Oh my gosh. Yeah. You do not have to be the hoorah cheerleader up and down, jumping off the stage, running through, if that is not you. And one thing I say, especially for reflectors, there are other archetypes too, but reflectors and connectors, trying to be that way will drain you. That will drain you. You need your reserves for your brilliant mind. Do not that's not how you exert your energy and your knowledge. So if you're not necessarily that, don't do that. And honestly, everybody doesn't want to see the same thing. If I'm being very, very honest, like we need a balance. And so for meeting planners and event planners, they're already thinking that way, but
Mhm.
everybody doesn't need like 10 hoorah speakers. You need a balance of that. You don't need somebody yelling at you at 8 a.m. in the morning. While you're getting your breakfast at the conference. Okay. So you're like,
That's
we
too
don't
real,
necessarily
Rhonda. Too real. Yes.
too real, but like that's real. And so I just want to affirm everybody who feels that way. Uh, I want to speak to a couple of scenarios. You definitely gave me an easy scenario with that apprentice situation, but let's say now, right? Let's say if you were still in your roles, um, every leader faces this fast-paced meeting, people talking over each other, decisions
Mhm.
being made. So not an argument necessarily, but people
Yeah.
talking, trying to figure it out. And your instinct as a reflector is pause and think and gather my thoughts. But the room is moving, the conversation is moving. What happens for you in that moment? What usually happens?
Um, in total honesty, sometimes what happens is an overload and a shutdown. So
Mm,
that can happen, and it has happened. But other times, it's a matter of like understanding that your voice is important and has power. And so oftentimes I would just kind of let the room hash it out,
mhm,
right? Let them hash it out. Eventually there will be a space. Let them hash it out. Make notes about like, this is what I want to respond to.
mhm.
And then when the moment is right, even if it's at the end, here's what I think, everyone, or here's what I heard everybody say. And
Yes.
based on what I heard everybody say, here's
Mhm,
what I think,
mhm,
or asking a question. Have we thought about X? Have we
mhm,
thought about how this decision is going to impact this group? What I'm
mhm,
hearing a lot of is this. So, trying to kind of replay back what you heard, being very intentional about listening and taking it in, but also like having the confidence to know that whatever you have to say is worth saying and worth them hearing.
yes.
Because I think sometimes as a reflector, we can get caught in that, cycle of insecurity,
Mhm,
questioning ourselves and our voice. So
mhm,
it's like for me, it was just knowing that my voice mattered and knowing in myself that my voice mattered, or that the questions I had to ask were important, whatever it may be. And I will say too, in all honesty, that became easier as my career went on and as I got higher and higher in my level.
mhm,
We have to acknowledge that for folks starting off, that's
mhm.
going to be much more difficult because once you elevate, you are given a certain level of credibility in the room that you don't necessarily have in the beginning. So
Yeah.
once you've earned that credibility, that becomes a little bit easier. But yeah, over time for me, it was just like knowing that I didn't have to be like spouting my opinions all the time,
Mhm.
but what I did have to say had value, and I shouldn't bottle it up. I should definitely,
Yes.
soak in everything and come out with something that matters.
Yeah. This is really, really good advice for anybody who is growing in leadership. If you identify as any archetype,
Yeah.
but especially reflectors, Yvonne is 20 plus years of experience. And I really like what you said about like, yeah, as you got higher up in leadership, it became easier because
Yeah.
of course you're more confident in your skills and you have more power and more ability
Right.
to say the things and to do the things. But people starting out that may be reflectors, maybe they're feeling like, okay, well, how can I get in here and how can I? And so Yvonne, you're being really affirming to these people of like, hey, your voice matters.
Yeah.
Your voice matters. And it probably matters way more than you think because, again, you have that unique perspective and way to process things that often a lot of people do not. And
Yeah.
so trust your wisdom. That's my biggest note for reflectors. Like, trust your wisdom. Don't
Mhm.
doubt it. Don't think because you're slower or quieter or calmer to come through that it's not as valuable as the people who like have their veins bursting out like don't feel like that. And you offered some great even scripts like, hey, here's a question. It's kind of like no disrespect, and again, I'm those other archetypes, so I can say that, like, but it's kind of like how parents, when you see your kids, I know you have kids that are close in age, you see them fighting, like, let them figure it out, and then I know when I need to come in. It's the same thing, like, let them express how they need to express, and then here's my time. I think another piece of advice that I would add to that is, if people are expecting you to talk and you're not ready, because I think that happens often, you just need more time to process. Rosa, my marketing manager, she's a reflector. She's like, you outed me on this, but she's like, she's always like, I need some time to process. And so like, just honestly telling people like, I need to pause. I need to process. I want to sit with this for a second. There may be I'm feeling like there's this, but let me sit with it and I'll get back to you, and then get back to them. Like really get what you need. Get what you need, everybody. Get what you need. Get what you need in these spaces. And let leadership know what you need when you speak to them as well. Because I think a good leader, an inclusive leader, will be responsive to that, and you can continue to grow. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I love what you said too about your advice for folks who are newer in their careers, that their voice matters and matters more than they might think it does. And I think this goes back to what we said earlier, kind of when you have a third party opinion coming in, sometimes the people who are new in the room, they're new to the company, they're early in their career, whatever it may be, they are coming in with a fresh perspective and not thinking about just the way things have always been done there before, which is a trap we can get caught in after we've been somewhere for a long time, or after we've been doing what we do for a long time. So yeah, the confidence to know that just because you're new, quote unquote, doesn't mean that your voice doesn't have value.
Just because you're new doesn't mean your voice doesn't have value. I love that. Yeah. They chose you for a reason.
That's right. That's right. I mean, sometimes I got the best insights like from interns that I worked with who like taught me stuff, because sometimes there was a generational difference, and I'm like, okay, I just learned something, you know?
Yep.
So we just have to be open to listening to one another.
Yeah. I want to say so much more. We're at 38 minutes.
Oh my gosh, we could have just talked all day.
We keep going. Well, I want to have you come back. I do want to quickly talk about keynote speaking, and then we'll wrap, because Ivonne is an incredible speaker. She is booking for 2026, y'all. Just so you know. But you brought up speaking and how when you started, you thought you had to be like this rah-rah person. What is your process in preparing to speak, and how does your reflector show up in terms of like keynoting and that type of speaking?
Sure. So first I'll share kind of what I speak about. I speak about workplace culture, communication, connection, and change. So specifically, I talk about what I call the ghost gaps in the workplace, which are these hidden, invisible divides that live in every workplace that kind of determine how each of us experiences the workplace differently. And they don't have anything to do with who you are personally, but they have to do with the boxes we put people in at work. So your title or your pay grade or your location, whether or not you're a manager, whether you work in IT or HR, all of those boxes we're in kind of shape how we experience the workplace. And in between are all these gaps of information and understanding and communication and opportunity and power. And those are the gaps that I talk about, and how can organizations narrow those gaps to create a more balanced and connected workplace. But also, how can you as an individual in that ecosystem build a better workplace for yourself? How can you elevate your career and get noticed and get visibility so that you can narrow those gaps? So that's kind of the umbrella of what I talk about. So the way my reflector really shows up in that is it has been a culmination of my entire career to bring me to this body of work, and really understanding the dynamics of a workplace, how we communicate at an organizational level, at an individual level, how biases show up. My work as a diversity officer, really understanding how different populations experience the workplace differently. So that's one way that my reflector shows up, and kind of like bringing this big picture body of work all together to create this new point of view about how we think about identity and fairness in the workplace. So that's one. But the other piece of my reflector that shows up when I speak is really adapting to each audience in a way that resonates with them. So if I'm going to speak I spoke at BMW headquarters, manufacturing company, corporate audience, had the CEO in the audience, I'm really talking about like, what are the things that the organization is responsible for doing to creating a better workplace, and why does that matter, and why is that going to improve your results? And then recently I spoke with an association of women who work in the metal industry. And for that group, it was taking that same concept but thinking about how do you use this concept to elevate your career? How do you take ownership and empower yourself to really own your own visibility in the workplace? So that's how my reflector really shows up in really thinking about like, what's the resonance with this particular audience, and then being very intentional about delivering a message to the audience in a way that is what they need for their own development and improvement, and what's most important for them, versus just having some blanket, like, hoorah message.
By the way, we are not anti-hoorah.
No. I love hoorah. I love hoorah.
But hoorah, there's more to the world than hoorah. That's our message.
Sometimes that's what you need. Sometimes it is what you need.
Sometimes you need it.
Yeah.
But I love that. I love that the ghost gaps are not only organization gaps, but in individual gaps.
Yes.
And I think, like, how do we fill those gaps and thrive individually and organizationally? So I appreciate that message. And I also love how your reflector shows up, because that's a huge part of my framework. Your audience first.
Yes.
You're literally there to impact your audience and make a connection. It's not about how great you sound or how much you wow the audience or how, it is literally impacting the audience. And so in order to impact the audience, you really have to understand your audience. You have to understand them. You have to study them. You have to know them. And so what your reflector really makes you good at is like really identifying, reflecting, integrating what you know to impact this particular audience. And if you go into like the big business keynote with the BMW CEO and all these other people versus a different conversation, how to pivot your message and how to release the things that are needed for that conversation. And so that's brilliant, just brilliant. Big thinker energy. That's what I would call reflectors. Big thinker energy. Yes.
I'm going to go with that.
Yes. I love it. So this has been so wonderful. If anybody is listening, we have the quiz here, but I'm also doing a workshop next week for anybody who wants to know how to leverage their archetype in whatever situation. So if you're a leader, if you of any level, even if you're just beginning, if you're a people leader, HR, talent, L&D that wants to train their people and really understand how you can support their communication skills, if you're a thought leader, an individual that really just wants to grow and be better, I have the speaker archetypes experience next Wednesday, a week from today, at the same time, just about a little bit, I think it's at 12:30 Eastern time. And what we will be doing is spending 2 full hours with only 15 people. So it'll be the exact cohort style that I do when I work with bigger companies, but I'm making it accessible to you. We will spend 2 hours really intensely going through in an interactive, fun, and creative way to learn our archetypes and use our archetypes. And so I will drop that link in the chat right now if anybody here is interested, and I'm available to answer any questions. But Ivonne, if you had one piece of advice or one piece of anything, you've given us so much. It's just like, I'm like, we need to rewatch this, take notes. I want to send it out to everybody. It's just especially my reflectors. This is your model of like, this is how you do it. What, if anything, would you offer this audience at this time?
My one piece of advice would just be to own your voice. That's it. Just own it.
Yep.
Just and it's okay if it's different from other people's. It's okay if it shows up differently. Just own it anyway.
Even if it's different than other people's, own it anyway. That's a beautiful message. That is a beautiful, beautiful message. Let me go ahead and drop this link in for the Speaker Archetypes workshop, just in case. Ivonne, where can we keep in touch with you? Where is the best way to engage with you in your work?
Yeah, so you can follow me on LinkedIn, Ivonne Furneaux, just look at my name. You can also go to IvonneFurneaux.com, and all my information about what I speak about is there, as well as a form and email and all that good stuff.
Yes, let me drop your link here too, IvonneFurneaux.com. For those of you who have watched before, I want to make sure these links, Jessica's usually here. If you work with me, you work with Jessica. I don't have no Jessica here, but I got Ivonne. So we would love to have you come back to do a conversation. Book Yvonne to speak, hire her as consultant. She is amazing. And you all got some great gems today. Everybody, thank you so much for joining me. And unmute yourself, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.